Hello, Nicola.
Hey Clay, how you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. So, on this short video that we wanted to do, we wanted to share with folks who are finding themselves in this space where they are now transitioning to be remote workers, and more specifically, parents who are now in a position of being remote workers. And the kids in the UK, of course, are going to be out of school indefinitely from Friday. And we wanted to share some three key concepts basically to help with that transition. So, just from my point of view, I've been working as a freelancer for a very long time, 20 some odd years. So I'm quite used to working from home, have the home office and the space and that sort of thing to accommodate that. And yourself, Nicola, you've been
Yeah, I've
working
been
on.
working from home since 2007. My kids were 7 and 4 when I first started working from home, and I seem to remember the school holidays were particularly difficult.
Okay.
So obviously, none of us have been in this boat before, but maybe there are some things that I learned and that you learned along the way that might help.
Yeah, and I think there's probably three key points in that. And you were the first one, I think, was an interesting one as we were talking off camera, was about the idea of an agreement. So if you
Yeah.
want to just share a little bit more about the agreement, what's important about that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's kind of borrowing a concept from coaching around making a contract for the conversation, if you like. And I think it really helps to set boundaries and set expectations. I think there are two agreements that you probably need to reach. One is if you have a co-carer, a co-parent, then there needs to be an agreement about who's working when and who's in charge of the children. And the other is with the children. If they're of an age where they can make an agreement and understand that, then I think that's a really helpful thing to do. So I imagine my kids from the age of about 8 could get a principle that I was going to do some work and they were going to do something else, and they were going to agree what that was,
Right.
and that was important, and a reference point doesn't always work out beautifully, but it's useful. Saves you just screaming at them when you get interrupted. So I just wanted to share a model for that my friend Julie Montgomery shared with me. This is what she and her partner have agreed to do during their coronavirus time, and they've got some big projects that they're going to do around the middle, and then they've broken the day into chunks, and they put some nice pictures with it and everything because they're quite arty people. But this is something you could do with your children, and I imagine you break this down into much shorter units, but making it visual. Your kids aren't going to respond to a spreadsheet or a list, but make something funky and visual, and I think that will be really, really useful. And I think doing that with your partner as well, if you've got one, then is also a really good idea.
Yeah, I like that. So it's kind of just taking a day and breaking it up into distinct chunks in that
Yeah,
one and
yeah,
going across the grid. So, no, fantastic. I think the big thing for me and what I would offer to folks who find themselves as remote workers is the idea about routine. Um, and one of the big things on the routine is to kind of, as close as possible, mimic the routine that you would have on a normal day. So, of course, you might not want to get the kids. The longer you can keep the kids in bed, probably better. But from a work point of view, get up around a similar time, go through the same sort of habits you do, eat breakfast, get ready for work. And if you start work at 9, be at your space of where you're going to work at 9 o'clock to start. And I think thinking about space in that sort of place is about creating a workplace if you don't have an office. I'm fortunate as a home worker already to have an office, but if you don't have an office, it's about designating a space in the house that's going to be work zone. And part of that is also letting the kids and your spouse know that when I'm in that space, then I'm working. I'm not home to do the dishes or do the chores or answer a million questions. I'm in a sort of workspace. And I think it's important in terms of routine as well to take your regular breaks as if you would do at work, similar length of time of the break. I would say that if it's with the kids, if you got younger kids, they don't necessarily won't comprehend that because you're home, they'll see you as home that I have access to you. So maybe you take shorter breaks, but more frequent breaks so that you can check in with the kids and they can ask you their hundreds of thousands of questions that they might have for you in those break times. I think it's important to routine wise, again, to take a distinct lunch and step away from your work space, work area that you have, get fresh air, spend time with the rest of the folks that are in the house, and then after lunch, right back at it. And then the final bit I would say about routine is end of the day is the end of the day. And I know when I was working for Merrill Lynch, I was a remote worker as an employee. One of the things that I would quite often find myself doing is work until 8, 9 o'clock at night because you're at home, you're in your environment, you're not really thinking, I got to get in the car and commute. So you find yourself working a little bit longer. So I would say is to be disciplined about when it's end of work time is end of work time, come away from the screens, fold everything up and come out of workspace and be back into home space. So, yeah.
I agree with that. That was just my teenage daughter checking back in after she'd been out for a walk. So there you are,
Okay.
real life
There you are.
home working.
And I
I
think
agree
that's
with that.
okay. I think that's okay. I think it's one of the things that I think in this where we're finding ourselves at now, with the whole sort of coronavirus thing going on and people having to self-isolate and whole families having to be together, that there is going to be some disruptions. And I think employers have to be aware that, okay, there might be some noise in the house. I might hear a screaming kid if you're in a conference call, so we have to accommodate some of that.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the agreement point. So it's not just your other half and your kids, but also your employer with whom you have to agree what behaviour and level of interruption is going to be occurring.
Yeah.
So I think that part of that comes also to the third point I wanted to make, Clay, the third of the 3 points we're making, which is acceptance. So we talked about agreement, we talked about a routine, but I think there's also a real important need for us to accept that we're not going to be as productive as we would expect, that we are going to be interrupted, and that it's important to have strategies in place for us to try and stay on task. But when we can't stay on task for whatever reason, to try and manage ourselves in that situation by realizing that it's not going to be fair or reasonable to expect the same things of ourselves that we would normally. So I think that level of acceptance of our own behavior and the behavior of the people around us in our home is really important. Otherwise, we're all going to get really cross with each other very quickly. And it's going to make it hard to sustain this practice. And we are going to need to sustain this practice because we know that things are not going to go back to normal, whatever the new normal is, for a long time. So we have to set up ways that help us stay sane and stay as effective and make as best contribution as we can.
Yeah,
From the start.
absolutely. For the long haul, isn't it?
I
We're in
think it
this for
is.
good. Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, no, good. Well, thanks for sharing those points. And yeah, that's good. So back to routine.
Back to routine. I better go and find out what she's been up to.